Hello, Block of the Month fans, and welcome to another edition of the Arabella Block of the Month by Wing and a Prayer. We are on month number 4, the Jewel Block. We have 4 of them to make, and I will walk you through all of the steps. Are you ready? Let's get stitching. Well, welcome back, Block of the Month fans. My name is Rob Appell from Stitchin Heaven, and today I've got that Passion for Precision shirt on as we tackle the Arabella Block of the Month, block number 4 by Wing and a Prayer Designs, and this is going swimmingly well. And as a matter of fact, one of the exciting things is today at the end of the video, I will be showing you how to put the center of the quilt together using blocks 1 through 4. So we've got some sewing to do. If you are not caught up, you may want to get there at this point. If you're not using one of our kits from Stitchin Heaven, welcome. I'm sure you're enjoying the video. You can get the pattern from us to follow along. Our kits are currently sold out, but we will probably be doing this again in the future. Oh, that's right. And make sure that you are subscribed and smash that like button so that you can follow along with all of our wonderful videos, whether they're Block of the Month or standard tutorials or not. Normally I've got the blocks up on the wall, but there's a couple of things I need to be able to show you and myself all at once to construct the rest of the pieces. So we're basically in about the middle of the sewing of block number 4. And block number 4, if you're looking at your beautiful pattern here, this is the one over here called the Jewel Block. And it's actually 2 pages worth of instructions. So do make sure that you have your pages, and as a reminder, they're double-sided printed, and you can see right here where we're going to start building out that quilt from the center. We have several more months to go, so we're just going to put our center together so nothing gets lost. Strongly recommend you have your basic instructions because we're going to be doing some of the flying geese and the half square triangles. I like to use my color code from Stitchin Heaven. It just helps things stay so very nicely. But because we are using the original fabrics from Timeless Treasures, your color code here on your pattern from Wing and a Prayer is accurate as well. So we're going to dive right in. And I've got the things so that I can see them as necessary here. And then, as always, I've already followed all of these instructions here for my cuttings. As a reminder, something like this diagram here means that that is going to be made for a flying geese unit. It's going to be split once on the diagonal. This diagram here means once you've cut those 5.5-inch squares, you're going to cut them in both directions on the diagonal. And we're just going to follow the directions as we go along, and we're going to start with our V blocks today. Now the V blocks will finish looking like this, and we're going to make 4 blocks total today. So we're going to need to make 4 of most of the units, or 8 as we go along. So using fabrics 9 and fabrics 2, you can see that I have all 4 already created. But because the V block is kind of new for some of you, I want to take one more demonstration and just show you all how it's done. See how I snuck in that Texas right there? So really, you are utilizing your strips and your 2 peaks in 1 ruler by Creative Grids. You're going to go ahead and make sure that the oval that says 4.5-inch strip is at the bottom of your strip, and you can see that I've already been cutting these, keeping that flat tip aligned. So for the center units, you're just going to make 1 slice through both sides, and then for the sidebar units, you're using your flat edge as it was cut, also lining up on that 4.5-inch strip, but there's going to be 1 extra corner. So as I cut through here and I leave that straight corner up there, I also need to cut off that little tip here, and I'll show you that makes it super nice for alignment. But we might as well make a whole unit together. And so you can see now I'm just going to rotate my 2 peaks in 1 ruler around, lining up all my straight edges. Make sure I cut all the way through there. And then again, just taking off that little alignment corner. But boy, that makes a huge difference. So we'll set those aside. And then I like to start by covering up my blade safely. And just beware, you're working with Batiks. So there isn't necessarily a wrong or a right side, but we're going to be building back in squares. So make sure you have your things aligned correctly, your triangles. Now, this is what I was talking about. You're going to line up the chopped off point down on your bottom flat edge, edge to edge, nice clear there. Come on over to a 1/4-inch seam allowance. Now in this particular pattern, things will be trimmed down, squared up for the most part, but you want to make sure you've got a good consistent 1/4-inch because we're really going for accuracy. I'm going for accuracy in this workshop, in this block of the month. I like to do different quilts for different reasons, and this is one of the things I think is important. For this first one, we're going to actually press into the center. The instructions give us a lot of this extra information. If you look at them real closely, talking about where to press and whatnot. That keeps that nice and flat there. And then again, aligning. And I really like to shoot for getting that bottom alignment tip done first. Line this up here. And then again, I'm just going to press away. These will need to be trimmed down. So at this point, I like to have a square at least 5 inches, if not bigger. And the first trick I've learned is when I go to square this unit, I'm looking for the 1/4 inch right at this tip, because I want to make sure I can get a nice 1/4 inch seam allowance right in that point. So that's my first trim. And then I come down and I find my 4.5 inch mark, trim the bottom. And now, because we want to keep this point here as centered as possible, I'm going to double check to see if I'm at my 4.5. And I'm just a little shy actually, which means my seam allowance is a little bit big. So real quick, I'm just going to take and I'm going to scoot it in just a freckle. I can always trim more. And now I've made my calibration. And fortunately, I had my 4 that were dialed in. But what I was going to point out, if we need to trim off the edges, remember, center this center point right here at 2 1/4, because that's half of 4.5, so that you can trim your edges equally as well. So that again is your tall triangles. And now we're going to dive into the flying geese. So we'll be making 4 of these as well. This is what a flying goose would look like. This is going to use 2 of the corner triangles from fabric number 2, and then again fabric number 5 in the center. And I just love these numbered pins while working through here because it helps me communicate and keep myself organized. Again, half square triangles following your general instructions have a very efficient way that we're going to put them on. So as we start here, we're going to line up our bottom edge and our outside edge, and we're going to sew a 1/4 inch down on the right hand side. So we're putting the right hand small triangle on the base. And again, if you're not sure, you come in here and you look at this instructions right here, and it'll say flip and press to the triangle, okay? So that means that when I push this out, even though it may be a lighter color fabric, there's a technique to this. So I'm pressing out towards the triangle the first time. Then I'm going to put on my second edge, aligning them up. Oh, and folks, as I'm looking at this, because I've already done these, I'm apologizing. I've made a mistake here, and I might as well not pretend like I didn't make the mistake. I know that looks wrong. And when I read that, I was reading the second set of instructions. So look, the first one says flip and press to the base. So let's take the time to do this correctly, because it really helps with our bulk, our seam allowance, all of that. So yes, folks, I'm actually pressing just like the diagram was showing me, and that was the key. Plus I'd already done the other press up, the setups for this. And for this one, actually on these flying geese, I think I said we're making 4, but we're actually making 8 of these flying geese. So I basically ruined the whole video, but we're just gonna keep moving on. This is what we were looking for. I wanted this pressed into the base here, so that now when I lay this on, it's easier for me to get this whole seam on the outside, keeping that bottom edge aligned. And watch what I do here coming into this section where I still have my seam allowance guide on. So as I sew through, I'm just going to come in and I'm just going to lift, and this was the other reason that was important, that was nice and flat in there. I'm just going to lift that up, let it go right on through in that channel. And now as I come over, the instructions are going to ask me to press away and into the small triangle that I've added on. This eliminates the bulk up in that top peak right here, and these are going to also be trimmed to 4.5 by 2.5. So let's go ahead and get ready to do that now. So again, I'm going to take and I'm going to make sure that as I get ready to trim, I've got my real nice 1/4 inch mark there. First cut, And even though it seems laborious to do this cut in this fashion, I find that it's very effective. Now, I can come over here and do two things at once. I can just cut the bottom, no problem, by finding my 4.5 up here. But once I found my 4.5 up there, and if I find 2.25 at that point, now I can actually make a slice here and a slice here. So I've effectively cut 3 of the 4 edges that need trimmed. Now when I rotate this back around, I find my 4.5 inch mark. Just trim off this last edge there. And now my flying geese units are made. And like I said, we need 8 of those, but we're just going to set them aside for a few moments as we move on to the half square triangles. I can see my iron wasn't completely hot, which was also what I was fighting there. So let me just give it a moment now that it's warmed up. You let my wool mat do its advantage here. Fantastic. And like I said, we're just going to set those aside for the time being as we move on to the half square triangles. And in today's block number 4, we have 2 different sizes we're using. So at first, probably best, I don't know why I said it first, but really as with all of the instructions, you're gonna really wanna make sure that you're pairing up your pieces. But we did have 2 different sizes. So starting with the smaller groupings, fabric 1 and fabric 2 here, these fabrics are pretty dang similar, and that's intentional. But we've still drawn a diagonal line, and we're going to make 2 half square triangles. So with this diagonal line now, I'm going to go ahead and move my edge guide out of the way, because we're going to go ahead and do this. And of course you could do these in bulk and chain piecing by stitching, utilizing a 1/4 inch foot right along that chalk guide. And if you're going to chain piece, you can actually do all of your combinations, the smalls and your larges, right? And so I have a large combination that I still need to put together to show you how the next groupings work. So these large groupings here are going to be using the fabric 1 and the fabric 8 together. So this is going to be a very high contrast half square triangle. But again, even though it's a little larger in size than the first, we're just doing the same style sewing. So we can keep doing this all together to increase efficiency. These will be trimmed down, but they're going to be trimmed down today in different phases. So make sure you follow the next set of instructions with me here. But first we have to sew on the other side of that 1/4 inch seam allowance. Remember, we're making 2 of these out of each size. I should say out of each size sets of squares. We're making multiples because we're doing 4 total blocks today. You may want to take the time to label your bigger units, the B, C, D, and E for the swapperoo I'm going to show you here in a second. But let's just start with our small versions first. And I'm going to teach you to be safe, and that's just using a long straight edge on that chalk line to go ahead and cut and separate. And this is where the instructions start to take a bit of a V in the road, folks, to go with our cool V blocks and things. So for our smaller triangles, we're going to use a slotted trimmer, and we're going to trim them down to the 4.5 inch. Remember the trick that Tony taught us a few weeks ago, though. If you're using a thicker thread or an accurate 1/4 inch seam allowance, you want to give yourself a little bit of extra by putting that dotted line just on the other side of the thread as you go ahead and cut these down. And with the slotted trimmer, as a reminder, we trim first and then we press. So again, I'm just going to knock these ones down real close, real good, for the trim to the right size. And we're going to stop for a second to clear our brains, refresh our palates so that we don't get our instructions confused. So now at this point, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to see, does it make any mention? Press to fabric 1, which is your more darker, more printed fabric of these smaller half square triangles. And we're going to go ahead and set these aside as well. You'll be making 8 total of these 1-2 combos. And like I said, we're going to put them in the, we'll get back to that later on pile. And now we've got those bigger ones, the higher contrast squares. And again, for these, what we're going to really do is we're going to go ahead and trim on the diagonal line, okay? And then what is really best to do is come on over and press to your darker of your two fabrics. We're actually going to start building quarter square triangles out of these units and the other combinations. So you make all four utilizing those 6-inch squares of your combinations. And then what we need to do is we need to cut them one more time each. What I really like to do is cut with the perpendicular of my seam allowance line. But I also want to try to get as close to tip as possible. So I'm going to cut one square at a time, and I'm dividing them out like yay. And you're going to do these with the B, C, D, and E half square triangles. Okay, I'm hoping that makes sense. And then what I did, because you can see they're kind of different, I just set them in their like groupings, because you're going to go ahead and make a series of combinations. Kind of our, I'm going to call them light quarter squares and our dark quarter squares. So let's bounce ahead real quick. This is the quarter square triangle that I've already completed using the other groupings, the B's and C's. So it has fabric 9 twice, fabric 8, and fabric 4. Once we get down to trimming, folks, you have to be very cautious, because I made a mistake here, and fortunately I had enough leftover fabric, but this could really go south for us. So I'm going to walk you through making sure this doesn't happen to all of you. So we're going to set that way aside over here so I don't get my hands on it. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in my next color combination. So I had 8 and 1 together. Now I have 9 and 1 together. And what you're going to find is just swap them out so that you can make like these hourglass checkerboard quarter square triangles where your matching fabrics will be on opposite sides of the units. Okay, so we have 4 of these to stitch together each. Plus, like I said, we had the other darker combos. Let's really try to get that seam allowance nice in the center, and we've done that by going ahead and nesting in our seams. The other reason we were pressing to the dark. At this point, I'd like you to make sure you get your 1/4 inch seam allowance guide back on the machine. That'll really help, especially with these triangles. And now we're going to sew along that long bottom row. These, like I said, will be trimmed down. And we're going to stitch them all together real quick. Okay, and as you can see, I just chain pieced all 4 of those at the same time. And we're going to go ahead and press now, and I'm going to see if it makes us any difference nesting the seams. Doesn't matter which way we press. So here I'm just going to go ahead and let that steam of my iron do a little bit of the work. Look how nice those have turned out. And now we're going to get ready to go ahead and trim these down. Cool thing is, even though they were made kind of as opposites now, they are all the same, again, because of the nature of that style of piecing. So let me show you how to trim one of these down, even though you'll do it to all of them. I like to use a 6-inch square because we're making 4.5-inch squares again. I'm going to use my diagonal on the 45-inch. But as I come through here, I'm going to, like I have done before, I'm first setting the diagonal of the ruler on the diagonal seam allowance, regardless of which one it is. But at that center point, I'm going to make sure that it remains at 2 1/4 right in the dead center. That's what I did wrong when I created this one, right? I didn't look for the center point. I just squared it, and the center is not in the center. So to ensure that your center remains center, use your diagonal of your ruler. Make sure that your middle is marked at 2 1/4 because you're making a 4.5-inch square. And then go ahead and trim off one side, 2 sides. Then you can pick it up and rotate, find that bottom corner now, and it's going to be very easy for you to find your 4.5 mark. You'll notice we still have our diagonal running through, and now we're going to get a really nice squared down hourglass, quarter square triangles, whatever we want to call them, with the center in the center. So take a moment, go ahead and trim all of these out, and then let's take a deep breath, reset, and we can start constructing all of our blocks together now. Okay, and welcome back everybody. As I promised, I was going to trim down the last of our units of our hourglass blocks or our quarter square triangles. And if we're following along on the instructions, we've now kind of handled everything here in this half square triangle section. So just as a quick reminder, we made 8 of them with the combinations of the 1 and the 2 fabrics. Now you can also see I've taken a moment on the wall to get the blocks prepared because this is where I was stuck. We needed to get these made, which we just did and trimmed up. Everything's at 4.5 now. And then as you flip the page to the back side of your instructions, we're going to keep working through these until we get into the sidebar blocks. So first now we're going to go ahead and we're going to take both of the 1-2 combos of these half square triangle blocks, and we're going to rotate them so that both of the flat edges of this richer color, this is the color number 1 there, fabric number 1, that's going to be on the same plane, or all of that is along the bottom with the fabric number 4. So we're just going to quickly, with 1/4" seam allowances, we're going to go ahead and sew these on. As you can see, have been done on the units on the wall now. And for something like this, because I'm not crossing over my seams, I'm going to sew on one side. Just take a moment to make sure everything has stayed organized in its color orientation, and I'm going to sew on the other side, and then we're going to press both of these towards the center block. So in order to do that, I'm going to lay one of those half square triangles down, press into the hourglass quarter square triangle units, and then lift it again to do the same so that both of those seams are pressing into the middle, because when we get into assembly here, that's going to really help. The patterns are very, very well engineered so that there's a lot of pre-thought in where the seam allowances go. So again, do that with 4 of them. And then we're also going to grab this unit here, and which was kind of the higher contrast of those. And then we're going to grab that early on, our first piece we handled today, the V block. And we're just going to match up that fabric right there so that the like fabrics touch. Again, 1/4" seam allowance. And just following our instructions as printed in our pattern. If I recall, the instructions ask us to press these into the V block. So we're going to press downward there. And you'll do that for 4 of them as well. And just set those aside, okay? Now, when we get into our long bars, our sew and flip bars, we're using the rectangles from fabric 3, and we're going to use squares with diagonals pre-drawn on them, or I drew them on them, from fabric number 2 there. But what I need you to make sure you're doing is for 4 of them, you're going to have them facing from the center down, and 4 of them facing from the center down in the opposite direction, because we're going to go ahead, stitch right on these lines now, and we're going to trim off for a flip and sew style method. If your 1/4" seam allowance guide is in the way, just swing it. It's not that big. And again, with these, you can chain piece, even they're heading in opposite directions. And you'll have 4 of each to make, but you can see that I've already consumed the other ones up on the wall with the finished squares now. Okay, now make sure that you take a moment, protect your fingers, give yourself a little less than a 1/4" seam allowance in there. I just like that for bulk management. Cut that off. Cut that off. And then let's go ahead and slow back down. And I want to make sure that you understand your orientations, because they're labeled A and B on purpose, okay? So right now, this one is a A, and this one is a B. And it will say right on the instructions, press A to the corner. So we're going to start with our A, and that presses up into the square we just put on. Let that sit there, and then B presses down into the rectangle. Again, helping with our management in a few moments of our seam allowances. Set those in light groupings as well. Okay. Now we're going to go in and we're going to grab those the flying geese we made earlier, and you're going to grab them 4 at a time. I always like to make sure that my diagrams represent the diagrams of the instructions. The last units you should have prepared now are fabrics number 6. These are just rectangles, and they're going to sew 4 of them to the right side and 4 of them to the left side. You can also do this in a chain piecing format. But from this point on, we want to make sure we keep that 1/4 inch really accurate. So I'm bringing back my seam allowance one more time, locking it down, utilizing my black tape to help me really secure. I know exactly where I'm at again. And then I'm going to grab that other flying geese and bar block. You'll be making 4 of each direction of these again. And we're going to go ahead and press into the bar, or the green fabric number 6, and stack these in like piles as well. Making a lot of sense, I hope, for us all today. Now we've got these units here, so we can go ahead and start to marry them all together. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is make sure that my triangle here down, just like my diagram, here down just like my diagram. Now I'm going to bring this around, and this is the visual spot check. I think you can see it best right here, but you're going to be using that same fabric to now piece together, which will be a bigger triangle up here and a bigger triangle up here. So make sure that your white or your lightest triangles are lining up on that outside. Flip these over and go ahead and do a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and do your best to really line up where those triangular units come together. Do this with all 8 groupings. You notice I'm starting both times at the top to really try to manage that color grouping there. And now we're going to go ahead and press both of these sections, regardless of how they're constructed, into the bar, into that fabric 3, the larger rectangle. There's just a lot less bulk and seam there. Oh, that sure looks nice, doesn't it? And same on this side here. Look at that. Isn't that cool? And this one's equally as impressive. Whoa, maybe the shirt is starting to work. Only took 4 months, folks. Okay, and now we can set these also aside opposite directions. But it is time to go ahead and construct out our 4th, or I should say your 1st, of the jewel blocks. So let's go ahead and grab these here, and we're going to look at our diagram nice and slow. We're going to start with this center, which has our V, right, our peaky block. I'm going to put that in my lap, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make sure that I've got a green bar in its position and a green bar in its position, and or notice these are going to start to form up those diamond or those half square triangles there of some new cool opposite colors. So again, matching up these seam points, I'm going to sew on one side at a time, and I'm actually going to press between sewings. Earlier I did have a little bit of a hard time lining up this section, so I made sure that, oh, that looks good. I slowed down a little bit, but on a couple of those I did have to get out the seam ripper. I'm going to press again away from center. Remember early on in this next unit at the top that we're going to put in, we've pressed towards center, so that's that magic all coming together. Lining that up, lining up the center seam, using my fingers to nest and wiggle everything as accurate as possible. Okay, good enough for this guy. And going ahead and pressing again away from center out into those bar blocks. You're all doing fantastic. I'm so glad you're with me here for this. Now, as we go ahead, check this out over here. We're going to bring the last row together, and your checkpoint is to make sure that you're putting those two like fabrics back together now. It's really cool the way that forms. Now this looks like a jet plane for me. I don't know if it's just because I was such a big Top Gun fan or not, but I think this is an awesome looking block. And in just a second, we're gonna pull out the blocks we've made from months 1, 2, and 3, and we're gonna organize them, and we're gonna build out our center for the Arabella Block of the Month quilt top. This is gonna be great. Promised you we'd get to it today. And I'm going to press now up and away from the work I was doing. Got a little bit of a long piece there, but I'm not too worried about it because all of my seams line up nice. So we're just going to put that upright on the wall for now. And what I've been doing over the last several months as I've been working with all of you is I've been stacking my pattern pages on my groupings. So I think I'm going to go ahead and just keep this diagram here and kind of working backwards. My first block should be in the center. Okay, so here's going to be our first block, and it's uniform, so it can be rotated in any of the directions. We're basically going to build ourselves a 9 patch now. So then the next series, I'm going to have 4 blocks. Oh, I see. It's not, of course, I haven't practiced this. I've just been putting it together. It's going to go from our middle into our blocks we just created today with our jet plane tips pointing outward. So that means that we're going to do one of these, tip away from center, and one of these, tip away from center. Let's figure out where this next block comes in. Now that is the V block stars. And for this, it wants us to organize these with our dark. See that? That's the dark, and those are the lights of the V blocks. The darks are going to be facing the outermost. So when I bring this in here, oh, wow. Okay, I see it. So again, my darks are going to be in my outermost, but look, this is that fabric touching and fabric touching here. It's all coming together. So look for that while you organize. Darks, lights out there in the center. Let's go ahead and pull this off the top here. Point that out again. And just go, as you can see that I'm doing nice and slow. Okay, so your dark and light star blocks, I think these were month number 2, maybe 3. I'm feeling a little disorganized at the moment. We'll get back to those later. And right now I'm cataloging. There's my dark and my dark, outer corner, outer corner. And even though these batiks are beautifully matched, they have enough contrast that you can see those working together just like that. Oh my gosh, this is going to be incredible. So I'm going to go ahead for a second and just kind of actually make it easy on myself. I'm going to pin my diagram here on my wall so that we can stitch this together. Again, at the moment it's just the 9 patch, so I'm just going to confirm I've got a dark and a dark on the outside. I'm going to flip this over. I'm going to look for those 2 seam allowances. And we're just going to do a 1/4 inch seam allowance. But don't let yourself get going so fast that you start stretching or distorting here. You want to make sure that everything stays as accurate as we start assembling rows as it was when we were building our blocks. This is looking great so far. And like earlier, because I'm not really sewing over, I'm just going to take a moment to help bulk management, double checking my darks are on the outside of those V blocks. And I'm going to go ahead and lay that down there. And now I'm going to rotate it because I want the bigger chunk of fabric on my sewing machine. Starting up here now, and I'm just going to go ahead and make that seam allowance. Anytime I have a seam that can come together, I'll match those up. And this is fun, folks. I haven't done a block of the month like this where we actually get to build the center and then let it rest for a while. So I'm really excited about this format, and I'm very pleased with the results so far. I'm going to go ahead and press away from center on these rows. So we'll remember in the middle to press towards center. So you can use your nesting tricks for small seams, just like you can use. Did that come out weird? That sounded kind of weird. Just like you can use them for your big seams, right? So now I think I can be a little bit risky. I'm going to put this, I know I just put it sideways. We'll put that there. Okay, now let's go ahead and get our center together. You have multiple seam allowances in these rows to line up. Okay, and as a reminder, now that we're to our center, we're going to press towards the middle, lifting up that series and pressing again towards the middle. Just make sure that you're putting it on so that you still have your points pointing outward. Finish out this series, and then let's build it all together. Okay, folks, I'm putting on the last row from the center, and again, just lining up all the seam allowances I can, all of my seam points that I can, trying to keep everything as accurate and moving center out in the color fashion as possible. I can guarantee it's not perfect, even with my passion for precision shirt on, but it is looking beautiful. The instructions are fantastic. I love the tips that Tony shared with me, and I'm able to share with all of you here. And there we have it, folks. Not only did we all complete 4 of the block for the jewel blocks, but we should all now also have our beautiful 36-inch Arabella star center. And I'm double checking from the back to make sure I got it all right. It looks like I did. I will finish pressing this out and I will store it safely until we get on to block number 5. We've got a bunch more fantastic patchwork to do, and I will be here with all of you each and every step of the way. We're so excited to have you joining us at our Block of the Month headquarters here at Stitchin Heaven's YouTube channel. I really enjoy doing these slow-paced projects with all of you. Please let me know what Block of the Months you're also enjoying other than Arabella right now. And until we see you in a month from now, please stay well. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end of the video. It really helps support our channel. If you haven't subscribed, do so now. Hit the little button to be notified every time we go live or do a new video for all of you. And here's one from the past I think you'll really enjoy.